Welcome to this explainer. Think about it. The United States went from a handful of scattered early colonies to an absolute global superpower in just a few hundred years. It's wild. It's a dizzying, super complex story full of massive progress, but also deep fractures. And it fundamentally shaped the modern world we all navigate today. So let's unpack exactly how it happened. Here's our roadmap for today. We're looking at four main eras. First, colonies to independence, then expansion and the Civil War, third, the rise of a superpower, and finally, the modern era. Let's get right into it. All right, kicking things off with part one, colonies to independence, literally the birth of a new nation. Now, the spark really hits with Columbus arriving back in 1492. But, the actual foundational blocks, those were laid over a century later. We're talking about the really perilous establishment of the first permanent English settlement in Jamestown in 1607, and then the Pilgrims landing at Plymouth just a bit later in 1620. As the decades rolled by, these 13 growing colonies started developing their own totally distinct identities, and that naturally started clashing hard with British taxation and rule. The tension was just boiling, and that's what ignited the American Revolution. You had a scrappy colonial militia led by these now iconic figures, Washington, Jefferson, Franklin, and they actually pulled off the unthinkable. By 1783, they won independence from the most powerful empire on Earth. No small feat, right? Okay, so independence is secured, but now the founders are staring at a completely blank slate. How do you actually govern this brand new country? Well, their answer was the 1787 Constitution. They came up with this brilliant idea to split the federal government into three balanced branches: legislative, executive, and judicial. It's essentially this giant, resilient system of checks and balances that honestly still governs our daily lives right now. So, with George Washington stepping up to the plate as the first president in 1789, a really critical question pops up. How exactly was this young, super ambitious nation going to push its borders outward while at the exact same time trying to manage these massive, deeply rooted moral flaws that were just brewing beneath the surface? That brings us to Section 2, Expansion and Civil War, a period of intense growth and severe fracture. To put this growth into perspective, just think about this massive multiplier, 2. Back in 1803, the Louisiana Purchase literally doubled the physical size of the country overnight. And get this, they bought it for roughly 3 cents an acre. Crazy, right? But we absolutely have to acknowledge that this explosive 19th century growth came at an incredibly steep cost, sparking intense conflicts and leading to the massive displacement of Native peoples. Adding all that massive territory through the Louisiana Purchase and later the 1846 Mexican-American War forced the country's absolute deepest division right into the blazing spotlight: slavery. The friction over whether or not these new territories would allow human bondage basically brought the nation to its breaking point. And the tragic result? The catastrophic Civil War that tore the country apart from 1861 to 1865. Now, following the sheer devastation of that war, the country entered an era called Reconstruction. Trying to heal a society that fractured wasn't easy, so the government radically overhauled the Constitution itself. They passed the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. This officially abolished slavery, granted citizenship to former slaves, and guaranteed voting rights regardless of race. These were profound, absolutely crucial milestones on what would be a very long road to equality. But what's fascinating is that at the exact same time, the whole economic fabric of the nation was totally transforming. You have this fractured agrarian society that is rapidly being rebuilt by the smoke and steel of the Industrial Revolution. By diving headfirst into new technologies and mass production, the economy completely exploded. It generated wealth on a scale never seen before, totally modernizing the American landscape. And seeing that robust industrial foundation really begs the question, how exactly did all this unprecedented wealth, all this newfound technological might, turn the U.S. from just a rapidly growing country into a truly formidable global superpower? Well, let's look at Section 3, Rise of a Superpower, an era totally defined by global conflict and influence. The 20th century basically thrust the nation violently onto the world stage. We see the U.S. enter World War I in 1917, which really tipped the scales over in Europe. Then, decades later, the devastating attack on Pearl Harbor in 1941 pulled the country directly into World War II. Emerging victorious from those two massive global conflicts, that completely repositioned the United States as the absolute center of world affairs. But as you probably know, the end of World War II definitely didn't bring lasting peace. It almost immediately triggered the Cold War against the Soviet Union, and this lasted all the way until the 1990s. But this wasn't fought on your traditional battlefields. Instead, it was defined by this terrifying nuclear arms race, a fiercely competitive space race, literally racing to the moon, and a proxy struggle for global dominance that dictated almost all foreign policy for a good half-century. Okay, but while projecting all this immense, unprecedented power globally, we really have to look inward for a second. What kind of major social and political earthquakes were transforming the nation back home? Because let me tell you, the 20th century was just as explosive domestically as it was internationally. Which leads us perfectly into Section 4, the modern era, a time of massive social changes and new frontiers. Right alongside its rise as a superpower, the U.S. went through this incredible, rapid domestic evolution. You had the civil rights movement, championed by visionary leaders like Martin Luther King Jr., vigorously dismantling legal segregation. And right alongside that, you saw crucial women's rights campaigns and these broader social justice movements gaining immense momentum. They were literally rewriting the laws and totally reshaping everyday American society. Then we hit the dawn of the 21st century, which brought entirely new realities. The tragic September 11 attacks back in 2001 radically shifted the nation's focus toward national security, spurring long wars in places like Iraq and Afghanistan. Yet, right amidst these heavy challenges, the country also hit some historic milestones, like the 2008 election of Barack Obama as the very first African-American president. So going from a handful of struggling early settlers to where we are today, this whole narrative is just defined by extreme highs and really profound lows. Today, the sheer vastness of the United States' impact on the globe, it literally cannot be overstated. We feel its influence every single day, radiating outward across global culture, entertainment, economics, and, of course, international politics. As the country continues to evolve, it's constantly facing new hurdles and undiscovered horizons. So as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with this to chew on. How will a nation built on such a wildly complex history of triumph and fracture use its past to navigate the totally unforeseen challenges of tomorrow? It's a lot to think about. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you next time.